Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, man?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to this topic. And I actually just got done with a ethics of war class, so excited to put a little knowledge to use here. Hopefully I do APSU justice.
Let's hope so. This is my own branding. This is my own situation. I made all of this up on my own. I didn't have a class. I'm not a philosophy major. I'm busy doing mathematics and important things.
But economics is a moral philosophy, no?
It can be, and it was maybe 100 years ago. But after Alfred Marshall, it really moved away from being a moral philosophy and moved towards more being an objective science. Especially during the Friedman movement and the positive, logical positivists,
right? Theoretical modeling and such.
Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different than the last debate. I'm just going to run through my my statements, then let you run through your statements. My definitions will come in through as I go along.
Okay.
And I'm actually going to try really hard on this one because America.
All right, let's do it.
Hold on, I got to spit this dip out. You just put one in, didn't you?
I sure did, yeah.
Hold on, it's cool. I'm drinking My Little Pony drink because I'm a 6 foot, 235 pound infantry brony. Try to figure that out. All right. Justifying the Iraq War. The anti-war movement in America is one of the most morally repugnant ideologies that I have had the pleasure to go head-to-head with. We are speaking of a place that was known as the concentration camp above ground and a mass grave underneath. I will argue for the justification of the Iraq War. To further clarify, I offer the following definitions. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapon with capacity to inflict death and destruction on such a massive scale and so indiscriminately that its very presence in the hands of a hostile power can be considered a grievous threat. Modern weapons of mass destruction are either nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. Encyclopedia Britannica is where I got that definition from. Jus cogens is an international law principle which is accepted by the international community of states as a whole, as a norm from which no derogation is permitted. Now, before moving on, let me clarify the burdens of this round. As the affirmative, I must only prove that the Iraq War was justified. This is also not about the failure of the Department of the Defense and State's Department counterinsurgency doctrine. Having said this, my value is utilitarianism, a doctrine that is useful, is the good, and that the determining consideration of right conduct should be usefulness of its consequences, specifically a theory that the aim of action should be the largest possible balance of pleasure over pain or the greatest happiness of the greatest number. To preview my case, I will list 4 main contentions: weapons of mass destruction, the 4 reasons a sovereign nation loses its nationhood, our fault he stayed in power, and blood for oil. Do you want to stop here and state some of your beginning of your case? You want me to just run through my 4 statements?
No, I'll go ahead. So the ethics of war and just war theory is one of the oldest subsets of ethical thought. It dates back to the classics, to your Aristotles and your Socrates. You go up through Cicero, Aquinas. We have many modern thinkers on thought, most notably a contemporary philosopher named Oren. There are 6 generally accepted principles of just war theory. I'll run through them very fast. First, proper authority for a government to declare war. Second, a right intention, that they are declaring war for some moral ends. Third, we have jus ad bellum, or justice in war. That is a right cause to declare war. Those 3 come from Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas. These last 3 actually come from the Catholic Church. They had a conference on war in 1992, and these were 3 pretty solid principles that they came up with that I agree with as well. So, odds of success: does a nation have a a high likelihood of succeeding or reasonable likelihood of succeeding. Last resort, have we extinguished all other means of going about this? Proportionality. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. You know, you don't nuke somebody for a trade. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I don't think it is. You're going to have to explain that one a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the principle, the principle of proportionality just means that whatever harm was inflicted upon you, you know, you don't take it overboard in your retaliation. So I was about to give the example, if there's some sort of trade dispute, you know, nuclear weapons wouldn't necessarily be warranted. So some of these, I actually think that, yes, the United States does pass some of these checks, in particular, proper authority. So Bush did seek the approval of Congress, so you'll get no quibble with me there. Odds of success, I think that's pretty apparent. And I do want to say I agree that the jus ad bellum portion, the conduct within the war, is largely irrelevant to the conduct that gets us into the war. So I won't be really bringing up, as you said, the coin operations there. But where the failure of the Bush administration to establish a couple of key principles, first is right intention, specifically what their intention was, because there were several justifications that were floated out. The first being Iraq harbored al-Qaeda terrorists. This proved not to be the case. Secondly, we have weapons of mass destruction. Now, there are conflicting sources to what extent Saddam had those, and you know, whether he had them at all, whether he moved them to Syria or whatnot. So next, jus ad bellum. So that jus ad bellum, the reason to go to war, and generally speaking, the most obvious is a defensive war. Now there is a case, and this is actually in the UN Charter, that one could go to war for humanitarian reasons. But I feel like even that they really fail to pass the buck here. But most poignantly for me is last resort. I believe there was many things that could have been done before we fired that first shot, and I think as morally agent people, it is our responsibility to do that, to carry out all recourse before we resort to bloodshed. But all this is going into just war theory. If one was to make an argument from a moral realist perspective, I think that's a completely different subject. But we'll see where you take it. I'll pass it back to you. Okay.
Well, luckily, every single one of your issues that you have with just war theory are exactly what I want to address.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kick this off. One of the fundamental reasons for invading Iraq was weapons of mass destruction. Now, let me be clear, whether Iraq actually had weapons of mass destruction at this time is irrelevant to the actual issue. The reasoning behind this is that for you to agree that at the time that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction, you were taking the word of a criminal fascistic dictator where he openly blocked United Nations weapons inspections at this time. The main concern that Iraq had latent programs, which is why we did not face weapons of mass destruction during the invasion. Now, let us also look at Saddam's open purchase of medium-range road missiles from North Korea as it was rebuilding its banned missile program, as expressed by Mr. K, CIA advisor to the Department of Defense. Also, from this individual, we see that Bashar al-Assad became a major arms trading bazaar for the Hussein government. Next, we have to look at Saddam's actions in gassing 80,000 Kurds as per the Federation of American Scientists. Saddam's forces repeatedly killed hundreds of Iraqi Kurds with chemical agents, and the Kurdish town of Halabia in March 1988. The poison gas attack on Halabia was the largest scale chemical weapons attack against the civilian population in modern times. Halabia had a population of 80,000 people who were predominantly Kurdish and that sympathized with Iran during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. After understanding that this individual has used weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations and was trying to obtain more, this alone is justification enough for removing such a repugnant person from power. The next contention I want to elaborate is that Iraq had no justification for being a sovereign state and was no more than a ward of the international community. To state invading a country is an act of war would be true unless that nation was not a state at all. And that is not an act of aggression, considering that is the ward of the international community needing humanitarian intervention. This is implicit international law, but it falls under a just Kogan's norm, as I stated before. To explain why Iraq stopped being a sovereign nation, I will give Christopher Hitchens 4 proposed conditions that are known in Just Kogan's through the international community. They are not something he made up himself. 1, if it participates in regular aggressions against neighboring states or occupations of their territory. 2, if it violates the letter and spirit of the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and in other words, fools around promiscuously with the illegal acquisition of weapons of mass destruction. If it should violate the Genocide Convention, the signatories to which are obliged without further notice to act either to prevent or punish genocide. And 4, if it plays host to international gangsters, nihilists, terrorists, and jihadists. The first point is provable between the annexation of Kuwait, Oprah commitment to war with Saudi Arabia, and the war with Iran. Point 2, as per the World Nuclear Association, in 1990, Iraq was clearly in violation of its NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty, and safeguards obligations, and the IAEA Board of Governors ruled to that effect. The UN Security Council ordered the IAEA to remove, destroy, or render harmless Iraq's nuclear weapons capability. This was done by mid-1998, but Iraq then ceased all cooperation with the UN, so the IAEA withdrew from this work. And that's from the World Nuclear Association. Point 3, violating the Genocide Convention. There were multiple instances of genocide from the fascistic crime family, but here is a report from the Human Rights Watch. Human rights workers are the only beginning to sift through the modern mounds of documents, videotape, and material evidence captured from Iraqi security agencies. Forensic experts are examining several mass graves that may finally provide the answers to the fate of thousands of Kurdish people. Sources estimate the number at 182,000 Kurds who disappeared during the late 1980s in this so-called Anfal operation, Saddam's campaign to depopulate the Kurdish countryside. Lastly, the 4th point, yes, Saddam did have terrorist ties. 2 well-known cases are Abdul Rahman Rasin, a member of the team that bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, and Abu Musad al-Zarqawi, apologize. Zarqawi.
Okay,
a leader of the monotheism and jihad, a quintessential bin Laden clone who operated in central Iraq. That is also factual, and we did later end up balling him up. One of the points that rarely gets brought up into this debate, but which I find very important position, is that America had a chance in 1991 to remove this evil man and failed to do so, leaving Iraq under this pornographic and terrible rule for 12 more years. We had a moral obligation to the people of Iraq to invade and remove this evil from them. The fact is that immediately after the first Persian Gulf War, Saddam and his forces committed full-scale genocide with number estimates during the time range from 20,000 to 100,000 Kurds and 60 to 130,000 Shiite Muslims, again from the Human Rights Watch. This does not even play to the point that people living under this terrible rule of a tyrant who openly used torture tactics on his own people, the West imposed terrible sanctions, was correlated to the deaths of approximately 1.5 million Iraqis, while Saddam built 12 more palaces for him and his crime family. The last contention to be made is typically used as a negative colloquialism for the war in Iraq, blood for oil. The only difference here is that the liberation of Iraq gave the oil fields, which were previously owned by the murderous criminal, to the people of Iraq. These oil fields were an integral part of the Iraqi economy And after the sanctions, something we needed to kickstart a dead economy. To point how much better the oil production has got since the removal of Saddam will be an understatement. As the Wall Street Journal points out, Iraqi oil filled 3.6 million barrels of crude a day on an average in February, 50% more than 4 years ago. That beat, if only for a month, the country's annual output record for 3.5 million barrels a day in 1979 during Iraq's petroleum heyday. There's also the distribution of money earned from the oil before ISIS took over the fields that kept taxes low. Now, I'm not going to go into my conclusion, but I'm going to pass it off to you.
Sure. All right. You were breaking up a little bit. You were talking about Christopher Hitchens. Could you go over that one more time for me again? I'm sorry, like the connection kind of crapped out.
Okay, yeah. So what Christopher Hitchens stated is called just Kogan's, and I gave that definition earlier. And it's an international implicit code that most countries do fall under, especially in westernized countries. And this came out about the same time that not the United Nations, but the League of Nations, really? the Justice. Sorry. About the same time that came out, and that was something that was carried over as an implicit statement. So, if it participates in regular aggressions against neighboring states or occupations of their territory. 2, if it violates the letter and spirit of the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and in other words, fools around promiscuously with the illegal acquisition of weapons of mass destruction. If it should violate the Genocide Convention, the signatories to which are obliged without further notice to act either to or prevent punish genocide, which is us, if it plays a host to international gangsters, nihilists, terrorists, and jihadists.
Okay. So, starting off, you said you'd be arguing from a place of utilitarianism. Would you call that straight utilitarianism or leaning more towards rule utilitarianism?
Define that second, because I didn't really hear it.
Rule utilitarianism? RUELE?
I'm not completely familiar with that. Let me.
Okay, no worries. No worries. So, you've heard of like Google it. I'll give a quick.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't really. Since my value is going to be utilitarianism, I don't really need to justify it any more than utilitarianism.
No. I agree. I was just curious which one you were going for, because there's kind of a philosophical split off.
Just pure utilitarianism.
Okay, right on. So, would you think that it would also be justified to depose Kim Jong-un at this point?
To some extent, I would say yes, but I don't know enough about North Korea and some of the things that they do to make a justification right off the top of my head. I mean, I don't know.
I understand. That's fair. Rwanda in the 90s.
We should have intervened in Rwanda. That should have been an intervention. It's actually one of the saddest things, and one of the things that I dislike about the anti-interventionist side of politics.
Sure. The Soviet Union under Stalin.
Yes, should have been intervened in.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that we're talking about utilitarianism. If we're just going about deposing of anybody with really egregious human rights violations, you don't think that could, at least in our country, have pretty drastic effects, just in terms of consequentialism, our ability to conduct ourselves as a nation.
Are you saying that we're going to be stretching ourselves out by constantly attacking violence and taking them off?
Right.
Is that what
if we're acting sui sponte.
If we are the world's police, even more so than what we are now, would it stretch us to the point that we're not gaining as much from it? Am I driving that the utility
Yeah.
that America's getting? I don't have to base my utility purely off America. I mean,
Right.
this is an
I get it.
international. This is an international thing. I don't have to justify the war specifically for the United States. I'm just justifying the war in general. It should have been done. I think it was done correctly with the coalition of nations, and I think that's something to be driven home there.
Yeah, no, that is fair. That there was international consensus. Besides, a few outliers. France, freedom fries come to mind. Yeah. So one thing you did not specifically mention or hit on, I felt like was last resort. Was there? Do you feel like there was?
Okay,
Sure.
well, I can actually answer that. When it comes to the last resort, I think this goes along with something like you could carry this into a very similar debate with someone who agrees with the non-aggression principle, right? That we have aggressed to them, or that there could have been other ways to go about it. One, we have to look at, we'd had trade sanctions on them for years. The trade sanctions only hurt the actual people of Iraq, as I stated, and I think I figured that was a strong enough point to drag across, but I guess not. So what other could we have done here? I don't know. Trade sanctions failed. They had become emboldened after 9/11. Fear in the United States was on a rise, especially from Saddam Hussein, who at the World Leaders or the Arab Leaders Council bragged about how he bragged to multiple Arab leaders about how he had weapons of mass destruction and how he was more than willing to use them on the United States. Secondly, his attack on the petrodollar in the oil section, that would have caused massive heartache and massive damage to America's economic system. So you have to look at it that way. So if sanctions aren't working and he's emboldening himself, how far are we willing to let him go before it's a last resort? And I think the last resort's a bit subjective here. And I think that we did meet that purely based on his emboldenedness, his actions at the Arab Leaders Council, and the post 9/11 frenzy of the United States, that we had to go out and make sure that we protected ourselves proactively rather than reactively.
So interesting enough, call out doesn't let me look at you. No, you did your research. You constructed a good argument. Me, not so much. It's funny. It's kind of the war in Iraq is kind of kicked around as the definitive unjustified conflict, but I mean, I think you make a pretty compelling case. Yeah. And I didn't know that Hitchens wrote on just war theory. That was interesting to me as well. I assuming we're talking about the same Christopher Hitchens.
Well, what you may not know about me, and something that you see me allude to whenever I post up on Facebook, and it's something from like 5 or 6 years ago. When I was in the Army with you, I was a socialist. I was a hardcore communist at that. And I looked up to Hitchens like it was like he was the greatest thing that ever been. I can't say that I was necessarily a Trotskyite, because I was a Trotskyite for a little bit, but I mean, I wasn't a Stalinist by any means. But I was definitely bordering on anarcho-communism, and I had read plenty of that famous linguist. I can't think of his name off the top of my head because I go back and I read it now, and it aggravates me because he
Cohen.
No, actually, Cohen did write a lot, but no, it's the Chomsky. Sorry, Chomsky.
Okay.
I read a lot of Chomsky, and so I was more bordering towards anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, and stuff like that. And it was later after I discovered economics that I really turned right-wing. So I'd actually built a lot of my Iraq justifications previously before I joined the Army, because I'm a little bit older than you, not by much, but it was the invasion of Iraq was still in its infancy when I joined.
I think I'm older than you, man.
I'm 27. You might be, but I guess we can say specifically towards the army time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. You were older in the army for sure, but no, I'm 28. I'm about to turn 29. Ugh.
No, I know that's awful. I'm about to turn 28. But what I mean is I had a huge influence. So take the Rakasans, for instance, right? The Rakasans, they were the first boots on the ground in Afghanistan for Operation Anaconda. I actually had two squad leaders when I first joined. They were part of Operation Anaconda. And both of them were also part of the initial invasion in Iraq. And you know, whenever I heard the arguments against the Iraq war, I would always refer to them. And when it comes to weapons of mass destruction, they had in Tikrit found chemical weapons, and there's actually an ongoing investigation of other soldiers when they destroyed chemical weapons, that the chemical weapons actually did harm and damage to the soldiers.
Right.
And but what people seem to think is that chemical weapons aren't weapons of mass destruction for some odd reason, or that they were inert or buried underground and they weren't useful to be fired. But a lot of the pictures that were taken did show that these were capable of being strapped on, like that Nodong missile that I was talking about, and launched into Iran. And a medium range missile, I mean, he could hit parts of Europe at that time. And especially, I know that North Korea isn't very good with ICBMs, but you can imagine now with Iraq having working alongside of, you know, Russia, North Korea, China, and that strange axis of allies that I don't really understand, because they're all conflicting views, and I don't really know why Russia wants to be friends with any other.
Well, I mean, just because they oppose the United States, I think.
Well, yeah, I guess I could see that, but like Russia had such like a foundationally heart-to-heart movement when you know, communism fell and the wall fell and all of this,
Right.
and they had this great uprising of Christianity there. It's one of the largest Christian nations in the world now, bordering on, if not beating out America when it comes to Christianity, and they're Orthodox, so they don't believe in Protestant.
Very conservative blend of theology.
Right, and yet they align themselves with what I, as a Christian, which this may be of a bit of a controversial statement, the antithesis of Christianity is Islam, and I could not see myself as being partnered with Islam under that grounds as a Christian. Now, as a nation state, I could understand, but even then, I don't know if Assad and Iran would be the ones that I would jump to, especially when the Ayatollah of Iran has stated numerous times that he wants to kill all the infidels.
Right.
The Orthodox Christians kind of fall in a big portion of that.
You know, I didn't look into this, but I was listening to an NPR the other day that talked about Islam being the religion of peace being an incorrect translation. There was actually the word that they were actually trying to interpret. It was more akin to submission. So if you look at something like the jizya taxes that were imposed, that at least in some sects of Islam, they could let other Abrahamic religions exist as long as they were subservient to Islam.
Yeah, and you know, we can go back to the Crusades and some of the tactics that came, because the initial Crusade, right? They were going up against a hard charging group of Muslims, right? That had conquered 1/3 of Christian people. They did not really do the tax, and if they did, the tax was so strong that the Christian could not pay for it. Therefore, the Christian was put to the sword. Now, when Salah ad-Din and the Egyptian Muslims came into power, they had a lot of influence from you know, I guess you could say the Coptic Christians and really the heartland of the Abrahamic faiths, which is Egypt. So they would have a little bit more of a nicer way to put it, whereas like the homeland for Islam is typically a little bit of a rougher place than, say,
Right.
Egyptian Muslims and things of that nature. So yeah, I could see that, and I think that's absolutely atrocious. I couldn't imagine Christians doing it. I mean, I'm sure they have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But not to that. I mean, in Israel, the Christians after the First Crusade, who did retake the Holy Land, they did have a tax for people, but it wasn't a tax that was hefty enough that it put people out of
Well,
life
I look at more how Jewish people were treated in Europe itself during some certain time periods. Specifically during the bubonic plague, there were a lot of blame thrown around looking at Jewish people, and then obviously we got like the Spanish Inquisition and so on and so forth. I don't know if they had a tax or if the Catholic Church actually imposed like a doctrinal tax, but I'd be curious.
In Europe, no. In Israel, yes. When it comes to the Spanish Inquisition, you have to understand that the Spanish Inquisition, it was pretty brutal towards Jews, but the Spanish Inquisition was, I hate to say the word necessary. I don't know if it was justified, but at the time, I would definitely be an apologist for justifying it.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to understand, Spain had been under terrible oppression for well over 300 years, I think. And when the Christians finally came to power, especially in Spain, right? So a lot of people don't realize that Spain, the reason why they're darker than some of the other Mediterranean Europeans is not because that the Gauls were naturally darker. I think Romans actually talked about how white the Gauls were in comparison to the Romans. But the darker skin tone come from the rape and pillage by the Muslims when they invaded and took over Spain and Gaul. And the greatest battle that ever happened came from the Viking lords who had just recently converted to Christianity. They were the biggest forefront of the battle in Spain. And when they had finally conquered, it was really hard to tell who was a Christian because they had become so intermingled.
Right.
You have to build like a racial line, because if you go to Israel, and I hate to say this, but in the time frame, your enemy was brown, right? But you go to Spain and they're all a darker color, so you're just starting to ideologically cleanse everyone. And it was awful, but at the time, you could justify it for how much damage had been done previously.
Yeah, I think it wasn't the 1513, I want to say, is when the Muslims were actually expelled from Granada. It was, I think, much later than people realized. I mean, the Byzantium fell. There were still Muslims in Spain.
Yes. Yes, it was.
But there is one, probably the most oppressed religious minority that Muslims have done really egregious things to, and still do really, really terrible things to. And for a long time, Christians did as well, and you see this even in our many state constitutions. But the atheist, the non-believer. I mean, even yeah. Have you read Locke's treatise? What is it? The treatise on the need for religious tolerance. His last paragraph is, "Except for atheists, we don't need to worry about them."
Right, and I go back to I don't know if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson. I'm going to refer to him on this because I'm actually terrified of atheism. And not as like a Christian, like I'm terrified that Christianity will be stomped out, like something akin to what Harris wants, but not Hitchens. But without that moral fiber of religion, at least, and the idea of like debating whether God is real or not is irrelevant to the moral fiber.
You're talking about an objective source of morality.
No, you don't even have to have the objective source of the morality. I'm just saying, like the moral fiber of reality, right? Because once you get away from something objective, and I guess we can lean back on that, but I don't want to make it about that.
Yeah.
But we can lean back on that objective reality. And once you get away from that, you move strictly into moral relativism. And moral relativism and nihilism have done the most damage in the 20th century than anything, any more than any religion combined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, I will be honest. I think that sometimes in the secular community, moral relativism, you know, can run amok, but I don't feel like it has to be that way. I feel like there are some things that atheists can ground themselves in, or secularists, you know, agnostics, you know, humanists, what have you. There are things that they can ground themselves, their moral direction, that does not have to be a supernatural claim.
Well, it's still a metaphysical claim.
Sure.
Even Harris, and I think the best argument for that comes from Sam Harris, but it's still a metaphysical treatment of that, because it still cannot substantiate itself in pure reality, because if it substantiates itself, or if it tries to, it turns again into moral relativism. And moral relativism is not just a claim towards atheism. There's plenty of Christian faiths plenty of them that are moral relativists, and that's why there's a huge problem with Protestantism and Zionism.
You're talking about like progressive Protestants, like Unitarians, that type of thing?
I'm a Unitarian, so.
Okay, I'm not actually too familiar with their doctrine, but.
Okay, well, I'm a Michael Servatus Unitarian. I'll actually shoot you some of my stuff about him. He was actually killed by Calvin, because Calvinists are the worst of all the Protestants. As much as I disagree with Lutherans, I still agree that they hold a very strong relationship to God. I'm just not a huge fan of the Trinity, because I think there's a bit of a different idea on whether or not Jesus said he was the Son of God versus he's the Word of God. Because in the old Torah and in previous times back to Egypt, there was the idea that there were three things that came from the eternal being. That is creation, that is the coming, and that is the end. Now, if you want to take strict doctrinal approach, you'll think that Jesus Christ is the second word, because that's really the snap of reality for humans. Think of all that has changed in the 2,000 years after Christ in comparison to the 2,000 years before Christ. And it talks about in the old Hebrew text that when the Messiah comes, there will be a vast change. Now, Messianic Jews see the technological and the social and cultural changes of Christianity as being rooted in love and almost hippie-ishness, and that being like the sign of the Messiah, whereas strict Jews would say there wasn't a change, or there wasn't a second coming, because the earth didn't shake and the world didn't bow and things of that nature. So that's up for interpretation, but that's why I'm a Unitarian. For the most part, I'm a Catholic up until the point it comes to like some of the. I know it's so weird. It's the weirdest religion. I've made it myself, and I don't even care.
I mean, they have the sweetest, little things that they do.
They do. I love
what's the word I'm looking for? The ceremonies and such.
Oh yeah, they're
the rituals.
The Eucharist, and taking in the body and the blood of Christ.
So you came prepared. I'll give you this one. How about next Wednesday? Let's go with. I'll argue the affirm. Atheism is a morally justifiable stance.
I'm not opposed. I don't know how I would. That's such a weird wording, because I mean it can morally justify itself. So there's nothing to ground whether it is morally justified, but it can justify itself.
Did you just admit to like subjective morality? No, I get what you're saying. It does justify itself, but I mean, I would argue that all religions do. All right, well, let's figure out a phrasing then.
Yeah, because that's odd.
Yeah.
How about this? I want to dig into something that might be controversial. How about homosexuality is not genetic?
Oh gosh, I don't know if that's something I'd really care to argue.
Right? It's so nuanced that it's.
Well, I kind of been fed up with like identity politics.
Oh yeah, they're garbage. I mean, I just jumped into that because I had that statement today and I got blocked by a ranger.
By an army ranger or like a park ranger?
Yeah.
Oh,
like an army ranger.
Yeah.
I'll have you know I've been blocked only by veterans. I've not been blocked by a civilian friend yet, but all my veteran friends for the most part have blocked me.
I try really hard not to block anybody that dissents from me. I know if I did, we've argued so much on Facebook, but no, I don't, because I don't want to just be in my own echo chamber. I think that's not where it's I like making myself uncomfortable in my beliefs. I think that's important.
Oh yeah, no, that's why I love debate. I mean, if debate made money, I would do debate rather than.
Are you to me in the tournament?
No.
They got the two.
I don't have time.
Yeah, I get you. Let's figure out. Do you want to do something related to secularism? Let's try to think here.
Christianity makes the best case for secularism.
Christianity makes the best case for secularism?
Secular government.
Oh, secular governments. Like Christian philosophers? Or the doctrine of Christianity?
Foundationally, Christianity makes the best secular government. No, I would use scripture to justify this. I know that
government.
Strange. Yeah.
Gosh, I don't want to. I feel.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to find something that we have to dig down a rabbit hole to really go through.
I feel like I would just be arguing against the secular government on some level.
I know. I'm trying to trick you into
it. How about this? The 21st century needs secularism.
In general? Or so it needs to remove itself from religion as a whole, not as a government entity.
I'm not saying as an absolute, but I think that there is value in secularism.
Okay, so you're saying we should remove ourselves from religion. Like, we can still have religion, but it's not something that should be something like a European idea. Like in Europe, like they don't really talk about being a Christian or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take that.
All right. So
trying to think of a better way to word that.
Yeah, actually, I don't even really like that wording, honestly. So
this House Affirms.
What was your big quibble with atheists? That it lacks moral fiber?
Okay, so we don't have enough time. We got 1:35 really to drive into it, but I gotta go eat. But I'll shoot you a message.
Yeah. But hey, good talk. Hey, you came prepared, so I gotta give you that one. You came to research. Let's try to do one for next Wednesday. Maybe we'll do a topic on religion. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Okay. I'm always down.
Right.
Have a good one, buddy. I miss you.
Yeah, I miss you too. You gotta come to Nashville, man. I'd come to like West Virginia or wherever you're, Boone, North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm not that far. I'm like 6 hours away.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm gonna be honest. There's nothing to do there.
Yeah, no, there's not.
Hey, Pastrana's out here too, man. There's still a couple of guys hanging around.
All right, but seriously, my daughter's crying.
Okay, no worries, man. Good debate. Take it easy.